There comes a time in life, often around retirement or shortly after, when peace becomes more valuable than approval. Not everyone who walks beside you deserves to stay close. Not everyone who calls you friend offers you friendship. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to step away. Welcome back to True Senior Wisdom, where we gently speak the truths many of us carry silently. In today's video, we'll talk about 6 kinds of people you may need to keep distance from after 65, not out of bitterness, but out of care. Not to punish them, but to protect your peace. Because after all you've given, all you've endured, you deserve a life that is calm, kind, and honest. Let's begin. Sign number 1, the constant critic. You know the one, the person who always has something negative to say. They point out your weight, your choices, the way you speak, the way you dress, the fact that you repeat yourself, the fact that you're not what you used to be. They might laugh while they say it, I'm just being honest. But honesty without kindness is cruelty in disguise. After 65, your soul has earned the right to be spoken to gently. You don't need to explain yourself anymore. You don't need to prove your worth. You don't need to let someone constantly shrink you with their comments, no matter how long they've been in your life. Criticism that doesn't come with compassion is just noise. And if every conversation leaves you feeling smaller, more tired, more unsure of yourself, it might be time to love them from a distance. You see, constant criticism doesn't just bruise your feelings. It chips away at your confidence. It creates an echo in your mind that follows you even after the conversation ends. You second guess what you said. You replay what you wore. You wonder, am I really that out of touch? This isn't how love is supposed to feel. Healthy relationships uplift you. They don't diminish you. And at this age, you deserve to feel valued, not inspected. Maybe they're family. Maybe they're old friends. But longevity does not excuse unkindness. It's okay to outgrow people who don't know how to grow with you. And here's the deeper truth. When you constantly absorb criticism, your inner voice starts to imitate theirs. You begin criticizing yourself in the same tone they use. You shrink your joy, you filter your words, you brace yourself every time the phone rings. But life after 65 should not feel like walking on eggshells. It should feel like stepping into sunlight, warm, safe, and real. So how do you respond to a constant critic? Don't argue. That drains you more. Don't defend. That keeps you trapped. Simply pause, smile if you wish, and say, that's not helpful, and I'd rather not continue this. If needed, create some space, less contact, shorter conversations. Protect your emotional health the way you protect your physical health. Because emotional wounds don't always bleed, but they do linger. You don't owe them your energy, especially not now. After 65, your heart deserves quiet praise, not loud judgment. Your days deserve encouragement, not erosion. And your presence deserves people who see your strength, not just your shortcomings. Let the critics talk to themselves. You've got better things to listen to, like your own inner peace. And remember, silence is a boundary too. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for your soul is to walk away without needing to explain why. Because peace isn't selfish, it's survival. And kindness, especially toward yourself, is not optional anymore. It's essential. And if you're still wondering whether it's too harsh to take a step back from someone you've known for decades, ask yourself this: what has it cost you to keep them close? How many nights have you gone to bed doubting yourself? How many joyful moments have you second guessed because of their voice in your head? You've carried enough of that weight. Let this next chapter be lighter. Let it be kinder. Let it be yours. Sign number 2, the emotional dumper. This person might not criticize you, but they use you. Every conversation starts with their drama, their complaints, their chaos. And when you try to share something about your life, they shift the focus right back to themselves. These are the people who don't see you as a friend or loved one. They see you as a dumping ground, a sponge to absorb their emotions, a quiet place to vent without ever asking how you're doing. After 65, emotional peace is not a luxury, it's essential. You've spent decades listening, supporting, giving your time, your energy, your presence. And while empathy is beautiful, it should be mutual, not one-sided. Emotional dumpers don't want solutions. They don't want connection. They want release at your expense. You leave those conversations feeling drained, heavy, like someone poured their storm into your quiet sky. You might tell yourself you're being kind by always listening. But kindness without boundaries is self neglect. And this kind of relationship often hides behind history. We've been friends for years. They've always been like this. They don't have anyone else. But history doesn't make it healthy. And loyalty that costs you your peace is too expensive to maintain. You may start to feel anxious before they call. You might feel guilty for not picking up, even though you know the call will leave you feeling worse. That's not connection. That's emotional captivity. Sometimes they'll call you their rock, their anchor, their safe place. But what they mean is you're the one who absorbs the storm, so they don't have to face it themselves. And while it's noble to be strong for others, strength shouldn't come at the cost of your spirit. You deserve conversations that flow both ways. You deserve space to breathe, to be heard, to be held, not just to hold everyone else. So, how do you respond? Notice the pattern. Do they ever ask how you are? Um, Set a limit. I care about you, but I can't take on all of this right now. Shift the rhythm. Let's talk about something lighter today. Create space if needed. Fewer calls, shorter visits, emotional breathing room. Don't be afraid to say, I've noticed I leave our conversations feeling exhausted. I need to protect my energy right now. You're not abandoning them. You're honoring yourself because your peace matters. Your time matters. Your presence is not a place for everyone to drop their problems and walk away. You deserve friendships that refill you, not relationships that require recovery afterward. And remember, boundaries are not rejection, they're protection. You can love someone and still say, this is too much. You can care deeply and still step back because the weight of someone else's emotions should not break your back. Not anymore. Not ever again. And if you ever feel guilty for choosing your peace, just remind yourself you've spent enough years holding space for others. Now it's time to hold space for your own well being. You're not selfish for stepping back. You're wise, you're mature, and you're finally putting your heart where it belongs in your own hands. Sign number 3, the guilt giver. This one is subtle and dangerous. They don't criticize directly, but somehow you always walk away feeling like you've done something wrong. They use sighs instead of words, silence instead of requests, and phrases like, it's okay, I didn't expect you to come anyway. I know you're busy with your own life. I guess I'm just too much now. It sounds soft, even sad, but underneath it's pressure. It's emotional manipulation dressed as vulnerability. The guilt giver doesn't ask for your time. They make you feel bad for not offering it. They don't express needs clearly. They build a trap of disappointment that's hard to escape. And for those of us who've spent our lives showing up, helping, giving, guilt is a powerful tool. We mistake it for love. We confuse it with obligation, and we end up carrying weight that isn't ours to hold. But here's the truth: love should feel open, not indebted. Connection should feel mutual, not transactional. And your presence is a gift, not a payment. After 65, you've earned the right to say, no, I can't. And that doesn't make me a bad person. You don't need to be emotionally manipulated into connection. Real relationships don't use guilt as currency. So, how do you handle the guilt giver? First, recognize the feeling. Guilt should never be the bridge to closeness. Speak clearly. If you need something, I'd rather you tell me directly than make me guess. Protect your time. You don't owe people your hours just because they're disappointed. Name the dynamic. I notice I feel guilty a lot after our talks. That doesn't feel healthy. And if they lash out or withdraw when you set those boundaries, that tells you all you need to know. Love doesn't punish you for having needs. Real care doesn't sulk when you say no. And you should never feel guilty for taking care of yourself. You've walked long enough in shoes worn thin from service. It's okay to rest, to say no, to stop apologizing for not being everything to everyone, because you're not selfish, you're healing. You're not abandoning, you're choosing peace. You're not hard hearted, you're finally softening toward yourself. And that is beautiful. And one more thing: if someone needs guilt to hold your attention, they never truly valued your heart, because love invites, it doesn't trap, it listens. It doesn't sigh with silence, it asks. It doesn't punish you for not reading between the lines. So the next time someone uses guilt to pull you close, let your quiet no be your loudest act of self respect. You've given enough of yourself to guilt. Now, Give the rest of your days to freedom. That freedom begins the moment you stop apologizing for your peace. And remember, your peace is not up for negotiation. Your boundaries don't need to be justified. And your worth has never depended on how much you sacrifice. You don't have to be a hero to be worthy of love. You don't have to say yes to stay connected. You don't have to carry guilt to prove you care. You can simply be as you are and still be deserving of rest, of joy, of lightness. That is your birthright, and it's time you reclaimed it. And if ever doubt returns, if guilt whispers in your ear that you're being too distant, too selfish, too cold, pause and remember this. The people who love you well don't make you feel smaller to keep you close. They honor your time, they cherish your presence, and they give you the freedom to be your full self without shame. That's the kind of love you've earned, and that's the kind of love you deserve to keep. Sign number 4, the drama magnet. There's a certain kind of person who doesn't just live life, they live in constant reaction to it. Every week, there's a new crisis. Every day, a new conflict. Every phone call feels like a breaking news alert, and somehow you're always pulled in. The drama magnet thrives in chaos. They create it, feed on it, and then hand it to you like it's your responsibility to fix, soothe, or survive. Maybe it's a neighbor who always has gossip about everyone else. Maybe it's a family member who finds offense in everything and expects you to pick a side. Maybe it's a friend who turns every gathering into an emotional battlefield. After 65, you realize something sacred. Your nervous system matters. Your peace is not meant to be sacrificed for someone else's perpetual storm. You don't need to live inside other people's turbulence just because you care. You don't have to lend your heart to every fire they set. Because drama isn't always loud. Sometimes it's subtle, repeated emergencies that drain your energy. Stories that always center around betrayal or conflict. Passive-aggressive comments that stir tension in every conversation. And you may have mistaken their urgency for importance. But urgency is not the same as intimacy. Just because someone pulls you in doesn't mean they belong in your quiet circle. Worse yet, drama magnets often blur the line between connection and chaos. You find yourself confused. Are we close, or am I just constantly cleaning up their mess? You become their first call, not because they trust you, but because they know you'll pick up. You're reliable, grounded, calm, and they rely on your steadiness to keep their whirlwind spinning. But you were never meant to be their emotional stabilizer. You have your own rhythm, your own stillness, your own joy to tend to. You start to notice that your body reacts before your mind does. Your chest tightens when their name shows up on your phone. Your shoulders tense during their stories. Your evenings feel heavier after each encounter. That's your wisdom speaking. That's your body asking you to listen. So how do you create space from the drama magnet? Don't match their energy. Stay calm. Stay grounded. Don't problem solve. That's their pattern, not your project. Limit your exposure. It's okay to say, I'm not available for this kind of energy right now. Redirect the conversation or change the subject. Be honest. I care about you, but I need more peace in my life. I can't keep getting pulled into this. If needed, step away entirely. Some storms are not meant to be weathered, they're meant to be walked around. And most importantly, remember this. You were not born to be someone's emotional airbag. You don't owe anyone your adrenaline. You don't need to play referee in battles you never started. You deserve peace that doesn't have to be defended. You deserve conversations that leave you soft, not strained. You deserve relationships that exhale, not explode. If you find yourself walking away from someone feeling more tense than tender, that's your sign. It's not that you're too sensitive, it's that you're finally attuned to what your soul can no longer carry. And that's a beautiful thing, because you didn't survive all these years to live in reaction mode. You came this far to finally live in peace. So protect your calm, prioritize your breath, and walk gently in the direction of what makes you feel whole, even if it means walking away from the noise. Your life has weathered enough storms. Now it deserves a long, steady season of stillness. Sign number 5, the boundary breaker. There's a quiet kind of exhaustion that comes not from conflict, but from constant trespass. Boundary breakers don't storm through your life. They slowly push past the limits you set bit by bit until you barely recognize your own comfort zone. They may not shout, they may not demand, but they assume. They assume you'll always answer. They assume you'll always say yes. They assume your time, your energy, your availability belongs to them. They might be family, they might be longtime friends, but no matter who they are, they operate on the belief that your no is negotiable. You say you're tired, they stay anyway. You say you're busy, they keep asking. You hint you need space, they call it being distant. And here's the painful part: you've likely let them because you were raised to be kind, because you were taught that good people don't push back, because you didn't want to hurt anyone, so you let yourself be hurt instead. But after 65, your time is no longer a donation box. It's sacred. And your boundaries are not up for debate. They are the blueprint of your peace. Boundary breakers often mask their behavior in love. I just worry about you. I'm only trying to help. I thought you'd want company. But love that doesn't listen is not love. And help that overrides your no is not help. It's control. Sometimes it's not even what they say. It's how they ignore what you've already made clear. You tell them you need rest. They show up anyway. You draw a line and they step right over it, expecting you to smile. This kind of disregard isn't always loud, but it's deeply damaging because it teaches your nervous system that peace will always be interrupted, that your comfort is second to their convenience. And when that happens repeatedly, you begin to forget what safety feels like, not just in your home, but in your own skin. So how do you respond to the boundary breaker? Be clear, not cruel. I need time for myself today, and I won't be available. Repeat without explaining. That doesn't work for me. You don't need to justify peace. Reinforce with action. Don't pick up. Don't reply. Let silence speak your boundary. Expect resistance, but don't mistake their discomfort for your guilt. It's not your job to make everyone comfortable with your limits. And remember, people who respect you will respect your space. People who love you will honor your no. You do not need to be endlessly available to be deeply loved. You do not need to prove your worth through self-sacrifice. After all these years of saying yes to others, it's time to say yes to yourself, to your rest, to your rhythms, to your right to peace. Because your life in this season should feel like a safe home, not a revolving door. You've earned the right to lock it when you need to rest in silence, to choose who gets access to your heart, your time, your sacred hours. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors with locks, and you hold the key. And anyone who refuses to knock was never meant to stay. And when you finally stop over-explaining, stop defending your needs, stop feeling bad for choosing yourself, you'll notice something remarkable. The right people don't need access to all of you to love all of you. They'll understand the pause, they'll respect the space, they'll feel honored, not offended, that you trust them enough to show your limits. That's what real respect looks like after 65. It's quiet, it's mutual, it's freeing, and most of all, it allows you to finally exhale. Because when your boundaries are clear, your life becomes a softer place to live in. And you, dear soul, deserve nothing less. Because peace is not something you earn, it's something you protect. And your boundary is not a rejection, it's a reminder, I matter too. Sign number 6, the energy thief. Some people don't raise their voice, they don't cross obvious lines, but somehow every time you're with them, you feel completely drained. Not because they're loud, not because they're unkind, but because they take constantly and rarely give back. Energy thieves come in quiet forms. The one who always needs emotional support but never asks how you're doing. The one who talks for hours but listens for seconds. The one whose presence feels like work, not rest. And at this stage in life, your energy is gold. Every drop of it matters. Your days are not meant to be spent recovering from conversations or rethinking interactions or questioning your worth after being with someone. The energy thief doesn't always intend harm. Sometimes they're unaware, but intent doesn't erase impact. And you've spent far too long giving your calm to people who don't know how to hold it. You may notice it in your body. You're more tired after seeing them. You feel heavier, not lighter, numb, not nourished, and you start asking yourself, why do I feel so off every time they leave? That's not a coincidence. That's your body whispering what your heart has known for a while. This connection takes more than it gives. Energy thieves often carry an invisible storm, and they quietly expect you to hold the umbrella. But your hands are tired. Your spirit is weathered. You deserve more than constantly bracing for impact. These are not necessarily toxic people, but they are incompatible with your peace. And now peace is non negotiable. Sometimes it's not even a single event, it's a pattern. You smile less when you know they're coming, you feel anxious after their messages, you rehearse what to say to avoid being drained again. This isn't selfishness, this is self awareness. You are allowed to protect what's left of your quiet. You are allowed to choose recovery over routine. So, how do you protect your energy? Set time limits. I can talk, but only for a few minutes today. Shift the tone. Let's talk about something that brings us both joy. Be unavailable without guilt. You don't need an excuse to rest. Surround yourself with people who refill you, even in silence. Trust your body. If it feels heavy, it is heavy. Give yourself permission to leave, not in anger, but in wisdom. Because peace isn't just the absence of conflict, it's the presence of restoration. It's the feeling of coming home to yourself after being with someone, not having to recover from them. Energy thieves aren't always bad people, but they may be the wrong people for this season of your life. After 65, your heart shouldn't have to work overtime to stay steady. Your joy shouldn't be conditional on someone else's ability to behave. Your energy shouldn't be used to maintain someone else's balance while you lose yours. And your energy, it should be spent on what brings you life: a quiet morning, a meaningful book, a call with someone who makes you feel seen, a walk in the sun, a moment of stillness that asks for nothing but your breath, a smile shared without strain, a meal eaten without tension, a silence held without pressure. Not people who confuse your kindness with availability, not conversations that leave you second guessing your own worth, not relationships where you must dim your light to make someone else feel brighter. You are not selfish for stepping away. You are wise for knowing when to protect your flame. Let the energy thief find their own light. Yours has work to do, shining gently, quietly, beautifully on the days that truly matter. Because now your days are no longer for endurance. They are for joy. They are for peace. They are for you. And if someone asks what changed, just smile and say, I finally started listening to my own soul. Because your soul has been waiting patiently for you to choose rest over noise. And now you finally have. If you recognized even one of these 6 people in your life, the critic, the emotional dumper, the guilt giver, the drama magnet, the boundary breaker, or the energy thief, know this: you're not alone. And you're not wrong for needing space. You're not unkind for choosing peace. You're not cold for setting limits. You're not weak for stepping back. You're wise. You're weary, but awakening. You're not running from conflict. You're walking toward calm. After 65, life isn't just about adding more years. It's about subtracting what no longer serves you. You've earned this chapter. The quiet one, the clear one, the one where you get to choose not just who stays in your life, but how your life feels. Let the noisy ones fall away. Let the heavy ones drift. Let the story you write now be one of peace, clarity, and soft boundaries wrapped in self-respect. And if guilt knocks, if doubt whispers, if anyone asks, why now? Answer simply, because now matters. And it does. Your peace matters. Your boundaries matter. Your joy, your rest, your light, they matter. Thank you for spending this time with us at True Senior Wisdom. If this video offered you clarity or comfort, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your story in the comments. Your voice might be the very light someone else needs. And if you haven't yet, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because here, your journey isn't judged, it's honored. And your wisdom isn't behind you, it's still unfolding, gently, quietly, powerfully, one peaceful boundary at a time.